Well, it's been confirmed for a few hours now. Donald Trump is returning to the White House. Trump, who lost the last election, taking victory earlier this morning after securing several battleground states.
As for Vice President Kamala Harris, Democrats will now be assessing where the race was won and lost. Joining us now to break down what happened overnight is USM political science professor Dr. Ronald Schmidt. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
We really appreciate it. So first of all, can we get your reaction to Donald Trump's victory overnight?
I was surprised. To be honest, I expected to come on here this morning and say it was going to be a week until we knew anything. That being said, there's still a lot of things we don't know. We know the outcome, but how we got there is still something that has to be explored. One thing I can predict is going to happen right away is that a lot of politicians and experts on politics are going to say they know exactly what happened and talk about how they're going to build on those lessons immediately. And I would caution the viewers to take that with a grain of salt. I think it's going to take some study to figure out exactly how things broke down, especially, for example, in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, speaking of breaking things down, there was a lot of discussion about the gender gap in the voting. How much of an influence do you feel this had in the results, especially in some states? Biden did better than Harris when it came to women.
Yeah, I think the Harris campaign was actually very well run given the constraints. I was surprised at how quickly they were able to repurpose the campaign and how effectively. So I'm unsure exactly what happened in regard to messaging to women, especially seeing the gender gap we were seeing in polling, and also in regard to some other groups. I think one thing that may have happened is I think that Latinos have become more integrated into the, for lack of a better word, the white electorate. And so what we saw was a lot of Latino men and some Latino women without college education acting like a lot of white men and women without college education, and a lot of Latino men and Latino women with college education acting like white men and women with college education. And so that was an effect that I don't think that the Democrats were prepared for.
What other factors do you think contributed to Trump's win?
I'm still wondering about that. I mean, one possibility is that he was able to generate a great deal more enthusiasm in his base than the Harris campaign was in theirs. There was a lot of attention paid to his deflating rallies, but rallies are a different phenomenon from voting, and it's a different public than who shows up to vote. And it could be that we didn't see just how energized his followers were.
Of course, this is going to be a lot of dissecting over the days, weeks, months, and years when it comes to this.
Indeed.
Why do you think the Democrats weren't able to secure the presidential election? And like so many times you hear this over and over again from elections, is this the demise of the Democrats, or do they have to like start over or things like that?
We have two really big parties for a reason. You know, we have winner-take-all elections. Another thing that may have happened this year, it's been a bad year for incumbents around the world. You know, the Conservatives in the UK took a big hit. Macron's party in France had trouble, but most of these other representative systems, you sort of get a second shot at rebuilding your coalition before the final results. And we don't have that. You know, on election day, whoever gets the most votes is the winner, period. And so it may have been a sort of rejection of incumbency. Life has been hard since the pandemic, and this could just be part of a general rejection of that. So I'm not sure that this is specifically about one Democratic campaign or one particular party, so much as it is about larger factors that we've had to operate within.
Any thoughts on what we're going to hear from Kamala Harris today? I know she's going to be speaking.
I'm not sure. I've never been in a position to have to write this sort of speech, and I hope I won't be.
Well, here's the other thing we need to talk about. Republicans have gained control of the Senate, and as of 9:30 this morning, control of the House is still unclear.
Yes.
What's your reaction? And if Republicans also secure the House, what does this mean for policymaking moving forward? They've had all three then.
I mean, ordinarily, the American political science, as I was taught it, that would be a huge opportunity for any party. You might think of the GOP back in 1980 after the Reagan election, but the Republican majority in the House has had a lot of trouble getting things done. The incentives of their party give a lot of power to, for example, the Freedom Caucus, who try to stop legislation. So they might wind up with a lot of difficulty accomplishing anything, even holding on to all those levers of power. We'll see.
And here in Maine, the race between Golden and Ontario still too close to call. What do you make of that race?
Representative Golden has done a very good job so far in representing a district that's become a lot more conservative, despite being a Democrat. But the district may be catching up with partisan trends. At this point, I would not be too surprised at either outcome.
Do you think this? Do you think this really kind of shows, maybe learns a lesson for Democrats on how to campaign? That maybe that was the problem, but you know, because Kamala Harris wasn't a bad candidate. She was pretty strong when you consider like just 90 days. So you think that's something maybe they learned how to campaign better or something?
I didn't see a lot to this campaign that I thought was an obvious mistake. I mean, no campaign is perfect, but I think it was well run. I think that the Republican campaign had what to my eye looked like more flaws in the way that it was run. But I think the Republican base and Trump's base specifically within it was just a lot more energized and was perhaps better at mobilizing independents. But I hesitate to comment on this because I just haven't seen enough data yet.
And what does this victory for Trump represent in terms of political ideology in the U.S. and its position now moving towards the right?
I mean, I'm sure that he will claim a mandate, and we should hesitate about that. You know, it's a big, complex country, and the federal government has a lot of different players in it. We have a tendency to talk about the federal government like it's all just the presidency, and it's really not. But I mean, he was not wary about promising some pretty right-wing stuff. I mean, mass deportations and detention camps, for example, is something we haven't seen in the United States since the mid-20th century, when they were rightly, I think, seen as a horrible mistake. And so his victory might mean an endorsement by part of the public. It might mean people weren't taking him seriously. I think that the proof is going to be in the pudding. We'll see as he begins to push policies where he can get buy-in from the public and where he'll meet resistance.
Do you think what's shocking too is the popular vote? That you know, winning by 5 million. You know, 4 years ago Biden won by 7. That's a difference of 12 million votes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that surprised me too. And frankly, that's another thing I didn't expect. I thought if Trump won, it would be in the Electoral College, but again, I didn't see that shift happening. To return to the question of Latino voters again, in Texas, there was something like a 30% shift in voters from resistance, basically, to Ted Cruz and support for him. So we've got to figure out exactly what that means in terms of the future, and whether there's been a better job at selling the Trump platform, or whether this is a rejection of something else.
All right, sounds like there's a lot more to come, you
Indeed.
know? Okay, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.